Hello, everyone. This is Devin Thorpe for the CrowdFundBeat, and I'm excited to have with us a very special guest from Hawaii today. We're joined by David Drake. David, you're not always in Hawaii, but I'm a little jealous that that's where you are today. Thank you for taking time out to be with us.
Well, thank you for having me on. And I have business in Maui. We work with a lot of different funds and technology. So I do come out here quite often, which is a marvelous trip, I got to tell you.
Yeah. I've always been happy when I've had excuses to go to Hawaii on business, and it doesn't happen often enough. Well, David, you have been a real key player in the entrepreneurship economy broadly for a long time, and you have become increasingly a key player in the crowdfunding community, which is kind of a subset of that broader entrepreneurial community. What draws you into this crowdfunding community? What's interesting to you in that space?
It's the democratization of people involvement in how things and information is flowing. And that's what makes it fascinating. Now with the internet, you're allowed to reach people that you never thought you could be reached before. And I see entrepreneurs being able to utilize that technology to fund their projects and also find competent people to help them grow their companies. So it's quite fascinating when we got involved with it in 2011, during the time that we were actually lobbying Congress and having events several times a month, right there and then when the Congress was then putting together the Jobs Act that we know today. So it's been a fascinating trip to be involved with this for so many years.
Well, it is a remarkable shift in the capital markets, and you've been tied into the venture capital world for a long time. How do you see the crowdfunding world differing from and changing the venture capital marketplace?
Early days, and my company is a family office, so we've been involved with funds of various kinds and also angel networks. I founded 2 funds for angel networks and also on board for 2 others. But we've also been general partners and limited partners in real estate funds and private equity funds in the past. What I started noticing early on was, there was a lot of pushback by the angel networks and the venture capitalists that we had coming to our events in 2011 about crowdfunding. They didn't like it. They didn't like anybody encroaching their territory. But today, fast forward, they're embracing it. And that's what we were saying. Both you and I have been writing about it for years, and we're just saying, look, this is here to stay. Distribution is being changed, and the dissemination of data is being changed, and now they're embracing it. And we even see some firms in London who's actually making crowdfunding part of their angel network operations, where they have a lead angel go in and take a deal down, and then they'll use crowdfunding to get the remainder of a deal funded. So you're going to see more and more of that as a trend the next year and the following year, I would think. Wouldn't you think so?
Oh, yeah. I think you're exactly right. That's a key observation. I think that the angels will become the leaders in the equity crowdfunding space. How do you see the venture capital funds themselves playing in the crowdfunding space? Do you think they just follow on and it's largely business as usual with a new player in the earliest rounds, or do you see some sort of different dynamic developing?
Well, I'm tracking some of the leading ones, like Funders Club, who is borderline using crowdfunding for Y Combinator, and then you have other crowdfunding groups that are now getting more and more investment from venture capitalists. I think we're going to see an increase of venture capitalists putting money into this platform. But the trend will be from now on niche-oriented crowdfunding platforms, because the generalists like Kickstarter, it just takes too much energy to be generalist and to take market share. So I think the next 18 months will be niche-oriented ones, where you're very, very focused in a certain industry or segment. And the venture capitalists are probably going to continue just putting more and more money into the right platforms. Now, you write about this as well, so what do you see, Devin?
Well, I'm trying to figure it out, David. I'm not going to claim to know the answer. My theory, personally, is that venture capitalists will increasingly invest using platforms, and that will tend to increase syndication in the venture capital world. That's what I expect to have happen. But I haven't talked to enough venture capitalists, and of course we're still in the early days, so I'm not sure that's what we'll see. Some people I've talked to about this think I'm crazy. What's your take? Do you see the venture capitalists ultimately participating like other investors in these platforms and syndicating more, or do you think they'll try to stay out of that fray and play in a kind of keep a differentiated game going?
Well, I'm going to want to talk about real estate specifically. We are involved with the publication, not only yours, but also one focused on real estate, and not necessarily just crowdfunding, but it's Times Realty News. We just finished a report of the top 10 crowdfunding platforms in the world using technology to do real estate. And what's happening is it's not the VCs necessarily getting involved, but the private equity groups are getting involved. And we're just working and advising funds and institutional investors saying, you know what? We need deal flow of real estate. And I think the same thing will happen when crowdfunding for equity becomes legal. You see bigger players coming in and say, hey, we want to be fund structure and we want the right deals to come to us. So we're working with family offices all over the world, and they're starting to ask us, really, you have access to deal flow in the real estate market for 10 to 20% IRR? How do you underwrite that? And which platforms do you trust? And I think there's going to be a tremendous opportunity in that trillion-dollar market of real estate. And another thing that's interesting with the real estate space is you have a real asset. It's not a company that's going to close the doors and disappear. That land and that structure that was built has an intrinsic value that can't be taken away. And people understand real estate. So to me, I see us more and more focused on that. And I think the same thing. I think, now, they're looking at, okay, if people are buying gadgets on our website, venture capitalists might want to come in and fund the commercialization of that product to the big shops. I mean, Circle Up is doing the same thing. They get people to invest into their companies, and then they distribute it through the big brands and their stores. I think that's where the money is going to be in the future. Do you see money coming in from elsewhere, Devin?
I think I see money coming in from basically everywhere. What I see, my take is that essentially what will happen is that all private securities placements will migrate toward platforms where, whether you are investing a few $100s as a small individual investor, or whether you are investing 10, 20, 30 million dollars or even more as a family office or institutional investor of some sort, I think people will be coming to platforms. It will just become the way it's done. And it'll be interesting if it plays out as I kind of hope and expect it will, but I think you'll have people able to carry on a conversation that just couldn't have happened in the past, because you, as someone who is running a family office, would have a whole language, a whole lexicon available to you about due diligence and process that wouldn't be available to the average man on the street, because the law hasn't allowed him basically to do it. But now, if he's going on to crowdfunding sites and he's investigating and reading the same documents you're reading, and he's putting his $682 alongside your $68 million, you two can have a conversation. And he may be very guided and be trusting of you, but he's going to be now in a position to have that conversation with you and ask about cap rates and yields and the documents and the cap structure and all the different things that would have baffled him before. He'll get educated about, because he'll be able to get educated about it and actually do it. Do you think you're sitting in that chair from the kind of the rich man standpoint? Do you see this playing out that way, or do you think these worlds will be bifurcated as they have been?
I agree with you, Devin, and I see that the lead and the education will have to come from a bigger group who can cut a bigger check. But I think that also in a trend in the social impact of business and the corporate social responsibility is also going to be continuously increasing, and it's going to be colliding with this industry. And we are actually positioning ourselves with one of our holdings to be in that space where we have the CSR and the social impact combined with crowdfunding, sending that message. So even though a bigger investor will come in and take out a lot of smaller investors, you still want that social impact and allow others to come in. And that's exactly where the sinister or the center of crowdfunding allows to happen. So I think that's probably the trend, probably 2015, 2016, I'd say.
It is interesting to talk about that corporate social responsibility dynamic coming into play, and I like your idea that will happen through crowdfunding in some regards.
Yeah, and I'm traveling every day to different city all over the world for the last 3 years. I get to see family offices. I'm interviewing people just like you are, but I'm writing more articles, and I'm doing it because I'm curious. I love to learn, and by writing about something new, I get to know it and also get to share what I've read. So I mean, I'm reading your articles all the time, Devin, and you've been out there long longer than I have. I'm doing it as a passion project. You're doing it as a passion project, also as a mission, which I admire for a very long time. Now, what are the trends in the U.S. that you see happening?
Well, it's odd for me to have the shoe cast upon the other foot here, David. I think you're cheating, but I think it is interesting. It is relevant to see. You talked in our very first question about this democratization of capital, and I see that manifesting itself in some fairly meaningful ways, especially with respect to gender. Right, we're seeing women who are getting at least their fair share of crowdfunded money through, the Indiegogos of the world, right? Kickstarter. Those platforms are clearly delivering to women their fair share of capital. I don't know that we're seeing that yet in the investment crowdfunding world, but I anticipate that we will as the investor base broadens and more women entrepreneurs realize that they have access to capital and jump into that game. I expect that the same thing will also play out with respect to minorities, not just women, but other minorities who have also been somewhat excluded from capital markets traditionally. And so that gets me excited, and I think we're beginning to see the evidence of these trends developing. I certainly hope that's what crowdfunding will bring as it matures. Do you see that as well, David, in your exposure?
Yes, I am seeing it. And also, we're working with organizations. We do about 200 finance events globally, from family offices to private equity to venture capital and angel networks. And we're probably going to hit close to 300 finance events starting next year. So we have a very nice growth in the Soho Loft, which is one of my holdings. And we are talking to a lot of women groups. They want to get exposure to those investors and make that a social impact mission. So, I was supposed to be speaking in Stockholm today on that topic to 250 women that invest just in women. And, yes, I think the Center of Technology is allowing that to wake up and allowing give it a voice. So what you and I are doing is we're giving ideas and people voices by these interviews. And yes, I know you're supposed to interview me, but I usually take these opportunities to catch up with other people that I know, like yourself. And when the times I do a panel, I sometimes just want to catch up with the people in the panel. So, it becomes a little more, relaxed environment. So I get to hear what you're thinking and what's happening in the industry from you. So, over to you, Devin.
Well, it's great. I'm excited to hear that you're talking to a group of women in Stockholm. It sounds like unless you have a teleporter that you were unable to get to Stockholm to speak to that group, but I trust that they will meet anyway and that they will continue to invest in women. And that kind of movement, I hope, is becoming global. And I've seen some evidence already of that in the developing world. Certainly that's the foundation of micro-lending around the world, was lending to women, because men proved to be poor credit risks compared to women. And that seems to be true around the world when you're talking about $50 loans, that women handle it better than men, and so it will be interesting to see what the world looks like when we have fully empowered women to participate in the economy and the power structures of the world.
Yes, I'm helping them to set up conferences in Luxembourg and Dubai and India. So we're taking more of a global view on how to form capital, because that's really what the Soho Loft investment is about: educate on capital formation. How do you create capital and have a social impact for minorities, just like you said? Now, we're working with a women group first because they have a lot of momentum and they got one of the big six behind them. But I think there's going to be more and more, and you can't discount the conferences. People still want to have face-to-face and networking. So the conferences would probably never disappear.
Tell us a little bit more about what Soho is doing in some of your conferences and where people can go to learn more about those upcoming conferences.
Well, the Soho Loft, and don't forget the part of it, is handling about 200 finance conferences a year. As I said before, we have institutional investors, we have family offices, we have private equity, we have hedge funds, and we have angel networks and also venture capitalists. Some of them have crowdfunding panels, but most of them are not focused on crowdfunding, even though they might have a panel. And we do them all over the U.S., and also probably 10% of them are done abroad. I would just recommend people go to the website and look at upcoming events. We have normally 100 to 150 people come to each event, and we usually always disclose who the investors are. So you can actually go online and see the bio of our investors. Sometimes we have 5, sometimes we have 30 investors, and they're specifically looking for deal flow. They specifically and pitch them, which is interesting as opposed to, who is the investor you show up and you don't know who you're going to look for. So we disclose that on our website. Right. And it's clear. And I would tell people, go online, look at their bios, and if you think there's a fit, you need to be there.
Oh, fantastic. So the website is soholoft.com, is that right?
TheSohoLoft.com.
TheSohoLoft.com, okay. Fantastic. Well, David, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. It's great to connect, and I appreciate you breaking away from a busy schedule to join us. It's been fantastic to catch up with you, and I'll look forward to catching up with you face-to-face again one of these days at another crowdfunding conference.
I've been very eager to speak to you on this channel.
All righty. Thanks, David. Let's do some good.